How's it going, everyone? Alchemical Coyote River here with my first live on YouTube. So this is a continuation of the book review slash study slash audiobook of Practical Alchemy by Aethyrius. So as you guys know, last time, those who attended the not attended but watched the first video. Excuse me. What else? It around 6:20 a.m. So I'm a little tired. Anyway, but for those of you who watched the first video, you will know that we are starting chapter 4 today. So we are going to be getting right into that. Chapter 4, approaching the study of practical alchemy. Plant alchemy is traditionally what is called the prima work, the first work. It is the first work in alchemy for a number of reasons. It is far less dangerous than the mineral work, and it is where one learns the overarching level of the processes to be used in the mineral and metallic work. To be used later in the mineral and metallic work. The processes are the same in advanced levels of the work, but there are some things that must be overcome. In the plant work, however, there was a lot less to overcome because plant salts are far more agreeable for certain things than the salts from metals and minerals. The prima work is where one starts, or at least should be. The funny thing is that there are very little actually published on the prima work over the last 1,000 years. Compared to texts on the work in other kingdoms, there are relatively few texts on the real work as it is done in the plant kingdom. Until maybe 200 years ago, one of the most published topics in the world was alchemy. It was a huge cottage industry, pound for pound. One could get more for a book on alchemy than a book on almost anything else. It created a huge influx of alchemical information being pushed out into the European world, and most of it was written by charlatans who were really good at copying already plagiarized ideas and crafting presentation to make their books look alchemical. If a scrivener had a certain amount of paper and leather and was going to make a book, he could get 50 times more for it than he could a book about something else. I can understand why a lot of them were industrious enough to go about doing it. Some of them were probably not trying to be disingenuous, but many of them were. It led to a whole era of discovery that is what we have inherited in the modern world, because it led to a lot of physical manipulation without understanding the theory behind what real alchemists were looking for and why they were doing it, thus leaving out the mind component of reality, of which adept alchemists were fully aware. If one looks at our modern sciences, extolled as inherited from the Greeks and Greek thinking, a lot of the later Greeks in their thought processes were leaving out mind and became very materialistic. This is part of the schism between alchemy and science. That is why today our hard sciences primarily focus on the physical, the main exception being quantum mechanics, which is slowly gaining ground in the scientific mindset. I'm actually very glad that's happening right now. That is very important for what is to come in the near future. In my near future, I mean the next 5, 10, 15 years. And also long-term future as well. But yeah. Further problems within the alchemical pursuit arise because many of the older texts are sketchy at best. If one does not have training and really know what is right and what is not, it is almost better to avoid them altogether until enough has been learned to make the distinction. The problem with that is that the modern texts on the subject, with few exceptions, are pretty much rehashed versions of what Frater Albertus taught. Frater Albertus, Albert Radel, was a very cool guy. He was an alchemy teacher that taught within the Rosicrucian order, and he was the one person responsible for most of the alchemical instruction and energy put into most of that training in the first place. At a certain juncture, Louis Spence, who was head of the Rosicrucian order, decided they were no longer going to teach alchemy, which is bizarre because Rosicrucianism is supposed to be alchemically based, but they decided they were not going to teach laboratory alchemy. Frater Albertus said, "Fine, if the Rosicrucians aren't going to teach aren't going to teach alchemy. I'll go do it myself. And that is what he did. He created Paracelsus College and began a 7-year curriculum of teaching for the teaching of alchemy along the lines of the classical philosophical elements. They created a whole set of interesting challenges for him. He understood a lot more about the mineral work because there was a lot more written about it. In the course of his studies and research, he had made a lot of progress in the mineral work. But because primo work starts with the plant work, what he attempted to do was take that classic mineral work training and apply it to the plant work. And he created a process for what looked like classical elements and how they would be used in plant work. That was the early 1970s. So for about the last 45 years, that thought process, updated to today, that's about 50 years now. So fast forward about 50 years, that thought process has colored what pretty much everyone thinks is alchemy done with plants. It has led to a whole string of cascading repercussions of opinions about what alchemy is and whether plant alchemy is actually real alchemy because of the results of what those products do or do not do. Because they do not line up with classical results for good reasons, which is one of the practical focal points of this book. I have always said, and I will say it again here, that is not to diminish Frater Albertus in any way. Without him, most seekers would not be studying this concept openly. Before he attempted to create alchemical teaching from a classical point of view of the four elements, alchemy was really, truly, strictly the domain of adepts who kept it to themselves and only let in very few people who they felt were ready and appropriate and worth their time. Adepts were a grubby bunch for the most part. They do not have to take nonsense, and they do not. They are usually very isolated, and isolation tends to make people a little less sociable. Adepts are no exception to that. They like each other's company, and that is about it. Other people do not have anything to say that they feel is worth hearing most of the time, because they live in a paradigm that the adept has moved beyond. From a certain point of view, I can understand that, but that does not help those who are still seeking. Furthermore, adept-pupil relationships are by necessity traditionally one-on-one relationships, so teaching the masses has never been an adept agenda, nor even a remote concern. What Frater Albertus did, as I present in certain parts of it, even broken as it is, was still an incredible launching point to help masses of seekers move forward. Something in my mouth. Sometimes one figures out what something is by first figuring out what it is not. Part of what he did was contribute to the discussion of figuring that out, though decades later. He was a master by the time he died. Most people are not aware of the fact that he actually created the Philosopher's Stone. Not only could he create it, he could do it in a weekend from scratch, start to finish, and do a transmutation as proof of the stone. He only did that in front of a few people. He did that in front of a teacher of an alchemist that I know and trust. That is the only reason I know myself. I do not know if most of the people that are carrying on the legacy of Frater Albertus know that. From the way that they teach and the things they do, I have the working assumption that they do not, which means that he chose to segment who he showed and who he did not. The people that one would think would have been closest to him, were around him the most, may not have gotten to see that, because his demonstration was given in New Zealand. He did not do it in the U.S. where he normally taught. It does make me scratch my head sometimes and wonder why he made those choices, but clearly, as a master, he had a reason. It is not to question it, but it is to know that he did succeed in that work. However, at the beginning of his alchemical trek, he was not a master, and the prima curriculum that he created was his best attempt at recreating classical alchemy in that kingdom. If he got to do it over again, I would like to think he would have done it differently. It is important to take all of this and place what is taught in Albertus plant work in juxtaposition to what is clearly stated in the Emerald Tablet. It does not line up as neatly as many seem to believe because they continue to teach it in the same way. Understanding distinctions is paramount to moving forward into a more accurate and useful and practical understanding of alchemy and the great work. In order to do that, there is some more groundwork to cover. So, I haven't really read too much about Frater Albertus myself. That's something I plan to do online. However, I have heard that, as you'll see later in this book, spoiler alert, he is a little, I guess, excessive about certain things that don't really matter in alchemy. However, he was still very good at what he did, just based off of what others have said about him. Now, it's chapter 5. Understanding alchemy's place within Hermetic sciences. The two main branches of Hermetic philosophy are alchemy and magic. There are a lot of other things that are labeled Hermetic, excuse me, because they flow from those ideas, and because most people have not had access to really true initiatory teaching in alchemy and magic. Other Hermetic practices that are the lesser arts have become very popular. Divination, esoteric symbolism, astrology. Those things are all still stem from the same source. They are just substantially distanced from the root, and because of that, have eroded and morphed into concepts and practices that were not part of original instruction. At one point, they were all interconnected in the way that they were taught in the mystery temples within ancient initiatory systems. They were all aspects of one another that were used and taught to reflect each other within a holism, a truly complete thing. I feel, and it has been said by adepts, that situation was true in Egypt at a certain point in time. Later on, Egyptian priests became corrupt, and Egypt was conquered by the Greeks. The Egyptians never trusted Greeks, so they did not teach them the deeper levels of the teachings. After the Greeks became pharaohs, it all went downhill. Fortunately, the pure initiatory stream left Egypt a couple millennia before the Ptolemaic dynasty and went elsewhere through various mechanisms. This is why it was able to be preserved in other places, albeit in fragmented condition. Traces of it are everywhere if one knows what to look for. It is just that most of the time they are presented through the stilted view of academia and not from a truly initiatory point of view. That initiatory point of view of alchemy as the mother science of all Hermetic wisdom is of utmost importance because it reveals the mechanics of what makes magic function, regardless of one's tradition. It does not matter whether one is Roman Catholic, Wiccan, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, Rosicrucian, Martinist, or a practitioner of voodoo. The mechanics of reality are defined by the aspects described in the Emerald Tablet, and they are the same for everyone, whether they choose to recognize it or not. It is just the way the mechanics of reality work. So that's something that's a really big reason I personally am going to be studying alchemy once I have essentially stability, right? Because I really want to understand the mechanics of this universe and what makes it function, what makes it tick, what makes magic work, and just all the inner workings. It's like I think I have a pretty intuitive idea. However, I want to have that solid, grasped understanding of that. The mechanics of how it works on each level of reality is part of what the alchemist has to try to come to understand. The thing about approaching everything from this paradigm as a check and balance system is that if it is true on one level, it is true on all levels. If it is not true on all levels, it is not true. That is the basic working of the axiom, as above, so below, to accomplish the miracles of one thing. Now, how it is true on each level does not necessarily look the same. What one learns to do in lab work is a physical mechanical process that has a lot more aspects to it than just the physical manipulation. It's a typo there. But it teaches one the mechanics. The entire purpose of that, aside from obtaining quintessence on whatever level one is able to obtain it, is to then understand the mechanism itself. so that it can then be applied to the mind. The mind is not physical in the sense where one can manipulate it in the lab process, but there is a mechanism that must be fully understood in order to enter that overlap space between alchemy and magic that I mentioned being so important. It is the understanding of the mechanics and not just the manipulation, but the underlying deeper capital U of understanding why certain things are done. If one understands the theory and the why, eventually one can find the way through it. If one has a recipe and no real understanding, success in any capacity is unlikely. There is always stuff left out of the recipe. Just like a lot of magical practice was based on grimoires that circulated heavily, and most of them were subject to the same plagiarized bastardization as alchemical texts. If one understands the concept of grimoires, which were practitioners' working notes all kept in one place, one would know that none of them ever wrote everything down. They are like my notes for the lecture from which this book was later created. And again, I did put that in the description for the first video, and they're also in the description for this as well. If you, I highly recommend going and checking out Aethyrius' channel. That 4-part series on Introduction to Alchemy is brilliant. And if you guys like this, you will love that. I promise you. People that do not have any true initiatory training, that do not have any of this, just fill it in, are just running around doing the steps in the grimoire, thinking that they understand something. They do not understand anything. They are just trying to replicate what they think is a complete process. Some of them, if they are studying other things and they have connected a few more dots, will figure a few things out. And then they may have some success with a magical operation. If they actually succeed in any kind of evocation, then they may be able to receive direct instruction from an intelligence that may or may not be trusted, but at least it is progress of a sort. The thing that I really like about understanding alchemy's place within the Hermetic sciences is that if one comes to understand on a deeper level, its validation can then be seen in other things. Commonalities can be seen clearly. Amongst all the different magical traditions, they all have their different ideas. The one thing that is universal to all of them is alchemy. They will agree to that. It is just that there are very few of them that actually have had initiatory training in alchemy to be able to make meaning from that commonality. That is part of what I am driven in the direction of doing, helping people understand alchemy so that they can actually make more meaning within their own tradition without ever having to step outside of it. It does not matter if one is Roman Catholic, a witch, or a Jewish mystic. It does not matter because the mechanics are the same for everyone. All of those traditions have their own deeper initiatory paths. They are all there. This is why my introductory magic lecture takes 4 days, because showing where these aspects are in each system to allow people to see that just because somebody is led to be more devotional and therefore being Roman Catholic is a more fulfilling religious path to them, and somebody else feels more witchy and relates to the universe through a slightly different lens, does not mean at the end of the day that either one of them are doing any different. It is just that the way the path winds is more conducive to what the person needs in a particular incarnation. That is all it means. Being able to see the process of alchemy, if each in those traditions could do that, the purity of their paths could be restored without ever having to step outside them. If they choose to, because they are led to, that is a whole other thing. Alchemy is a path in and of itself, but it is not exclusionary except to those who do not understand. The thing that is really cool about it is that seekers really do learn how to view the different aspects of many things. In plant alchemy, one learns how to separate the spirit, soul, and body of the plant, purify them, and put them back together again to create this new one thing that alchemists call a quintessence, which is a condition of being not found in nature, but which has to be brought about by philosophical arts. What does that mean? It means that the same thing has to be applied on other levels of being, like the mental level, in order to do real inner alchemy work. Grasping this then makes one look at the mechanics of religions to identify where they have concealed their original understanding of different universal functions within the allegories of their traditions. If one just wants to be devotional and not do theurgy, God working, then it does not matter. But what if a person really craves a religious path that is actually bringing them conscious evolution that can be experienced and accelerated in one lifetime? Then it really does matter. This is what a lot of modern magic. This is what a lot of modern magical organizations purport to offer, but have lost, or they are revivalist traditions that did not lose it, but are still trying to find it. Excuse me. And yeah, that's actually a really big thing. It's like you have on one end you have organizations and orders who basically they do a whole bunch of stuff, but don't really understand why they're doing it. They just have a whole tradition behind it, and then you have others who they actually are doing stuff. They're doing rituals and whatnot, and they're trying to understand why they're doing them. They have a certain understanding of why they're doing it, yet they're still trying to find the deeper meaning, the root of why they're doing it. It's like they have this pull towards it, and they feel it's going to help them evolve, yet they still don't fully understand what it's leading them towards. But what matters, too, I believe, is your intention, right? Intention is a very big aspect of anything that you do, right? If you intend to go out and do something or meet someone of a certain whatever, then you're just that much more likely to do it. And when you really learn how to follow your intuition, that intention will manifest in some way, shape, or form. So where were we? There was nothing wrong with either of those. All of them have contributed to the overall conversation. This is also true. Though some contributions, however well intended, can have undesirable long-term consequences. That is also true. For instance, there are concepts that have the Theosophical Society put. For instance, there are concepts that the Theosophical Society put out into the world that have become embedded in the mindset of a lot of the magical community. That are things that Madame Blavatsky just made up and wrote down because they were her hypothesis at the time. If she had gotten to live for another 100 years, she would likely have very different hypotheses by now. But people have been dragging her concepts around for a century. She was not a true initiate. She was just a psychic medium with a penchant for intense research, which was really what she excelled at more than anything she ever taught. She did some really awesome research that allowed me to connect a few dots in my own research in places that I would likely have not been able to if it had not been for the research that she compiled. And yet, she is only one of many whose ideas have tainted modern magical thought with the turn of the century, Victorian era concepts that really hinder more than assist in attaining deeper magical understanding. We all stand on the shoulders of these people that were human and that were doing the best that they could and contributed to the conversation. It is unfair to penalize their memory for doing the best they could in a bygone era with far less access to information than we have today. There were people who likely hiked to Tibet to seek out anything of substance they could find, whereas most of us today just sit down in front of a computer. If those people were still around in the same body, they would know a lot more by now, given an extra century to go dig around and search. But all we ever have are frozen encapsulations. And all we can do is extract from that, take from it what is useful, and the rest of it is just there. I do not have to judge it or make it right or wrong. I just have to pick it up and carry. I just do not have to pick it up and carry it around with me. One of the pinnacles of growing in alchemical understanding is being able to take what one can see, is being able to take what can be seen in constructs that have been created for spiritual growth and break them down, look at them, and see what really lines up with a classical alchemical point of view and where things fall off track. It explains why there are so many kinds of belief systems, like 1,600 denominations of Christianity, all adopting slightly different viewpoints. inability to embrace deeper underlying commonality causes a continual fracturing until there is little cohesive value left. This is a cycle that persists in all great religions because over time there are too many aberrations of the original ideas from which they were founded. Eventually, the alchemical process results in a breakdown, complete and total breakdown of the whole thing, and then something new is created out of it. This is why major religions go through 2,000 year cycles. Within what we have as our recorded history, there are 4,000 year and 2,000 year lifespans for most major religions. Some of them overlap, of course, but the lifespan of these religions, which start off in a creative way, over time have enough aberrations and elaborations that eventually it all dissolves. Then, by necessity, something new comes out of all of that fertilized, dissolved chaos. Christianity, whether most people want to agree with it or not, was, by the time the Church of Rome got a hold of it at least, a recreation of the entire Egyptian religion. It was a theocratic recreation. The reason they got away with nobody figuring that out for nearly 1600 years was because nobody could accurately translate hieroglyphics until several decades after the Rosetta Stone was found in 1799 on the Napoleonic expedition to Egypt. They basically part and parcel hoodwinked the entire Egyptian religion and repackaged it. That does not invalidate it because the concepts that were embedded within Egyptian religion were perennial. The same thing within Catholicism. Catholic means universal. That was their attempt at catalyzing what they understood of perennial wisdom into a new theocratic power. They were using a slightly different allegory, which was pinned to a specific person who had a physical existence, which is one of the clever things about allegory and the way it is used in religion. Every single aspect of those two religions lines up, down to even the corruptions that happened 1,000 years after they were created. It is easy to think that a lot of the things that the priests in the Church of Rome did that were corrupt were innovative and new. They were not new at all. They stole those too, like the selling of indulgences or absolutions. That stuff that was stuff of the Egyptians. That was stuff the Egyptians did nearly 1,000 years before the Church of Rome even ever came about. It is easily seen in the changes that occur within the drawings of on the walls of the processes that describe how the scales of Maat, when a person died, would weigh the heart against a feather. For a long time, it was just the scales and the feather. And if the heart were not lighter than the feather, then Amit was there to devour the soul. If they were lighter, then it was the rest of the process. I'm not going to have much commentary for this chapter just because this is stuff I'm personally still digesting myself as well. However, I would love to discuss it in the comments with you guys. So I know no one will hear right now, and that's okay. If you're catching this afterwards, which everyone viewing this likely is, um, yeah, just feel free to write your thoughts down in the comments and we can have a discussion about it. Feel free. At a certain point in time, there develops this change in the way it was being presented, where Horus is standing there, holding up the end with the heart to make it lighter than the feather. Horus, being the son of Isis and Osiris, the Christos figure in that trinity, is basically lifting the burden of transgressions in order to pass being devoured by Amit. Thus, the use of vicarious atonement far preceded ideas now claimed as originally Christian. That story is not new. There were lots of savior gods before this is all pinned on Jesus, but in the Egyptian, it can be seen plain as day. The full transition and exactly what they did. That is when the selling of indulgences within the Egyptian religion came out. The priests of Amun became corrupt, which after a while usually happens in any religion that exists for long spans of time. In this case in particular, it happened in Egypt after the heart of the perennial. It happened in Egypt after the heart of the perennial wisdom it once offered had long departed, taking the true pharaonic science with it. The same things were happening in the Church of Rome. Martin Luther tried to fix it. His intention was never to not be Catholic. It was never to create a schism. It was never to do any of that. It was just to fix the problems. If he could have anything, if he could have become anything, if he could have become Pope, there might not have ever been a schism. Yet everything has to go through its own evolution. It eventually eats its own shadow. There are many things one begins to be able to see when connecting the dots in these processes. That makes the learning of it exciting, but also illuminating. Many turn to alternative parts. Many turn to alternative paths specifically because of the holes in religious dogma that that indoctrinates the ignorant and labels that which could illuminate as bad or forbidden. Of course, those were the places where I wanted to go. Not because I wanted to be rebellious, but because I wanted answers. At a certain point, I would have locked horns with the devil to get answers. I'm the same way. I can't sit and be, I can't sit and accept pre-formulated answers. I need to know the truth, quite frankly. And so that's why I continue to do what I do, just studying and research and practice and just ultimately also not worry too much, just remaining present in everything I do as best as I can, because at the end of the day, it'll all make sense eventually. And if not in this lifetime, perhaps the next or the one after. At a certain point in spiritual evolution, one can reach such an apex of divine discontent that one is then willing to empty one's cup of what they think they know in order for it to be filled by what one's higher genius wishes one to drink. I never did try to talk to the devil all that time ago, only because it became unnecessary. That is a good thing, as I am certain it would not have been a pleasant experience at that point in my development. Now, however, it would be like, oh, it is nice to see you. There was no there would not be fear about it. I understand that role now and its vast importance, because there is a mechanistic need for that universal function, which is also a cunning intelligence, without which we would not be able to exist physically here. We would not be able to exist physically to be here at all. In order to evolve outside of spiritual unity, the guardian function is of utmost importance, regardless of how maliciously maligned its personifications have been over the last couple of millennia. And that is the end of chapter 5. So I think I'm gonna cut it right here, just because I am tired and I don't want to. I want to make sure I'm bringing more of my energy into this whenever I do these. So I'll be doing my next live probably next week, either Monday or Tuesday. Stay tuned for that. I'll have the date posted on YouTube like I did for this one for the schedule, and we'll go from there. Yeah. Those of you who are watching the replay, which is basically everyone seeing this, I hope you enjoyed. And again, I will see you in the next video. Until next time, peace.